estrogen impacts every organ system. Didn't learn that until I studied menopause. And the fact is that estrogen affects our brain, our heart, our bones, our muscles, our gut, our pelvic floor, everything, right? It's not just about reproduction. And when I was doing my gerontology studies, we learned, yeah, well, reproductive system shuts down and women's periods stop, and then she may get hot flashes. Estrogen receptors are found in so many tissues and organs in our body, not only our reproductive, the whole reproductive system, but also our blood vessels, our immune system cells, our adrenal glands. The list goes on and on. So it's not in every single organ, every system and tissue, but in many of them. Are you trying to catch up with your menopause education because no one prepared you for this? Well, hardly anyone is, even your doctor, who may be useless. So you're trying to learn all that you can right now. So then this episode is for you. Really, this is where I'm going to be breaking down the 8 shocking facts about menopause that I wasn't taught while getting my master's of gerontology, which is the study of aging. And I'm going to fill you in on gerontology later and what that's all about, because I first want to address the broader issue that medical professionals like your general practitioner, your OBGYN, the person who's looking after your health care year after year, maybe even for decades, hasn't probably been trained in menopause, or has been very little. Because the research that's coming out, there's a 2023 Mayo Clinic study that found that only 31% of OBGYN residency programs in the US offer any kind of menopause specific training. And if they do, it's like an hour or two. I'm sure you've seen many influencers online who are doctors and who are professionals, and they're credible, and they go and they admit, I didn't get any training and I am a woman in menopause. And that's why they're actually at the forefront of this movement, because they've gone their whole lives and the whole doctor training and dealing with menopausal women, really not understanding how to take care of them. And now that they're going through it themselves, they're like, wait a minute, what's going on? And that's why we're having some of this movement. If you're trained in the UK, so doctor, it's a little bit better. And they say it's about anywhere between 1 and 10 hours, like, woo. And then for general practitioners, the doctors, I mean, I'm talking about OBGYN, but if you're talking about general practitioners, it's the doctors, most women who are relying for their healthcare decisions, it's even worse. And again, probably somewhere between 0 and 1. So there's another study published in Menopause, in the journal Menopause, and they showed that 20% of US OBGYNs, and this is obstetrician gynecologist, in case you don't know what that word is, only 20% felt very comfortable treating women experiencing menopause. I want a doctor that's very comfortable treating me through menopause, not like, I'm okay. Like, I want them to know really what they're doing. So it's such a low percentage. And then for general practitioners and internal medicine doctors and other primary care providers, that comfort level gets even lower. And yeah, so this is a big, big problem. And it's really no wonder that women are really falling through the cracks, because if our doctors aren't being taught, and aging specialists like me aren't either, well, where does that leave us? Honestly, it's unacceptable. And that's why you hear this menopause movement, we're all up in arms, because it just isn't. So if you're curious to know what is gerontology, if you're not, just fast forward. But gerontology is the scientific study of aging and the issues that affect older adults. It's a field we look at the biological, psychological, sociological, and even the healthcare policy, but all of these aspects of aging. And we look at how people are aging physically, emotionally, socially, and we are trying to figure out why people get certain diseases, why others don't. We look at the whole life course from birth to death. So we do have this focus on advocating for the older adult and how we can support longevity and well-being later in life. But it all begins in childhood, even the womb. I mean, we learned about intergenerational trauma. So this starts at a cellular level. So it really can go far back. There's things that we can't control, and there's things that we can. And so gerontologists They are working in research. They look at policy. They're working in the healthcare field and education, community planning. Even there are some companies, big corporations that are hiring gerontologists to figure out how to make their workplace more friendly for older adults. And gerontologists may help design programs for aging populations, and then they bring out their research and knowledge on longevity so that we can help other people improve the quality of life of older adults. It's not necessary. Gerontologists are not geriatric physicians, just to make this clear. This is not a doctor. A lot of people get this confused, but we do work with doctors. We do, for example, when we were studying Alzheimer's, we had to understand how doctors need to consider the caregiver, because the caregiver's health is taking a deep decline. So we're trying to train doctors and say, hey, look, don't just look at the patient, look at the patient and the caregiver, because if that caregiver's health declines, so does the patient who has dementia or Alzheimer's. So we need to take care of both of them. So that's just like one example. And I got my my master's of gerontology from the University of Southern California, USC. It's one of the leading programs of gerontology in the world. Okay. The information they have, the research, it's a research-based university. Maybe you've heard of Dr. Walter Longo. He's really famous for his studies on fasting mimicking and caloric restriction. He was my professor. And as a student, I was that annoying student, excuse me, raising my hand, always asking, but what about menopause? Like, how does the hormones affect this? And I didn't get many answers. But every time I got a chance to write a term paper or any kind of project or discussions, I brought on the menopause question. And I always saw the connection between hormonal decline and then age-related diseases. It was really clear to me, but the curriculum didn't reflect this whatsoever. And I'm hoping all my questions and annoying, I'm being the annoying student, although I did receive an award for, I don't remember what it was, like best master's student in my program. So I guess I wasn't that too annoying. But anyways, despite this program, it was really comprehensive in many other ways, really in depth. It was 2 years I spent learning about aging and longevity, but I had, I would say, about 30 minutes on menopause. It was pretty shocking. And that's because I took an extra course. We had extracurricular courses that were not in the core program on the biology of aging. And if you didn't take that, well, I guess you wouldn't be aware of that either. So anyways, just to give you a little overview, because some people don't, I never go into detail about what is gerontology and what the curriculum is like and what it offers. We looked at the biology of human aging. The course with Dr. Longo was called Nutrition, Genes, Longevity, and Diseases. We covered, not with him necessarily, but with other classes, frailty, sarcopenia, what happens in the human body as we're aging. And then I had other courses on the psychology of aging. And so we would look at ageism and stereotypes and then the mind-body connection. I love that course. I think that was my favorite course. And then we looked at the sociology of aging. And so how we can counsel older adults and their families through this process, at social policy, social security systems, health insurance, how to advocate for older adults. And then we looked at the epidemiology and chronic diseases like cardiovascular disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's, and other dementias like Parkinson's, Lewy body disease. We looked at long-term care. We looked at aging and healthcare reform, end of life and palliative care, caregiving, death and grieving, like the whole shebang. It was a really great course. We studied all of this, but menopause, barely mentioned, unless I raised my hand. So we would cover things like fall prevention. We learned how ACEs, which are adverse childhood experiences, affect our disease process later in life. But there was almost no recognition about the loss of our hormones and then how that contributed to that and how this could be a real tipping point for many of those conditions that we're actually learning about. So shock, horror. That's why I'm doing this podcast. And I actually made an Instagram reel. It's also on Facebook. You can go check it out if you just want the cliff notes, because I only have 60 seconds to do it. But we're doing this to break this all down. So for each of the 8 shocking facts that I've learned after I graduated, I'm going to go through the fact, why it matters, what's missing from the education, and then what can we do, right? That's the important part. So shocking fact number 1 was that estrogen impacts every organ system. Didn't learn that until I studied menopause. And the fact is that estrogen affects our brain, our heart, our bones, our muscles, our gut, our pelvic floor, everything, right? It's not just about reproduction. And when I was doing my gerontology studies, that's kind of what we did. We learned, yeah, well, reproductive system shuts down and women's periods stop, and then she may get hot flashes. Estrogen receptors are found in so many tissues and organs in our body. And not only our reproductive, the whole reproductive system, but also our blood vessels, our immune system cells, our adrenal glands, the list goes on and on. So it's not in every single organ, every system and tissue, but in many of them. And it really matters because if you look at menopause only as like the end of fertility, then you're really missing the point. You're missing the real fact that we face real risks when we lose our hormones. There's just so much at stake here. When I went to the European Menopause and Andropause Society Congress just several weeks ago in Valencia, in Spain, presentation after presentation, research after research, what happens when we lose estrogen and progesterone and testosterone? Well, osteoporosis, dementia, diabetes, heart disease. I mean, it was unbelievable. The list goes on and on. And the amazing thing is that this all modifiable. Okay. There are certain genetics, that impact and make us more vulnerable to these things than others, but we can do a lot. So again, back to my education, we were talking about menopause as hot flashes and period loss. It's, not enough. So I hope that changes. But what can we do? So first of all, you got to learn about estrogen and progesterone and testosterone, right? Even though this is the one factor I'm talking about mostly about estrogen. Estradiol is the real big one here because we have estriol and estrone, but the real lever here is the loss of estradiol. And so get educated on hormones and hormone replacement therapy. Understand what's going on in the body. And then you can learn more about symptoms. You can tune in to more episodes of this podcast where I talk with experts in menopause and the research and doctors who are actually treating women through menopause. So please go and tune in to the podcast. Go and subscribe if you haven't yet. And then I'll have a link at the bottom of the show notes to the menopause resources and my freebies page, where you can grab all the resources that I'm using myself in how to educate myself through menopause. There's even free books out there written by doctors, menopause doctors. So go check that out. Number 2, shocking fact number 2, there are 103 documented symptoms of menopause. Like, seriously, we're not aware of things like burning tongue and joint pain, electric shock sensations. I have a friend of mine who kept telling me years ago she's got electricity in her brain. The menopause symptoms go way beyond that. Those classic 4 or 5 people know about, the wonky periods or loss of periods, hot flashes and night sweats, mood swings, anxiety, weight gain, fatigue. Like, these are some of the classic, 5 or 10, maybe if you're in this learning more about menopause, you're learning more about that. But the younger you are, the less trained you are, you're literally only looking for a couple of symptoms. But go check out the podcast interview I did with Andrea Donsky, because she's the one who did the research on the 103 documented symptoms. She has a paper on it. It's been reviewed and it's fabulous. I'm not saying that everything is always related. Like, joint pain is classic menopause symptom, but maybe you had an injury. Maybe there's a reason that you have this joint pain. I had osteoarthritis. Believe me, I tried hormone therapy and I was hoping it would work for me. But there's a lot of crossover with many other diseases. But the low-hanging fruit, honestly, is hormones. So go check them out. And the reason why this matters to be aware of all these symptoms is because you may get misdiagnosed or dismissed, even worse, by your doctor. So honestly, go and check out. I'll have a link to that. I'll actually have a blog article that I wrote about the uncommon symptoms of menopause. And I have a link as well to Andrea's research as well. So again, we're totally missing this in gerontology. And I have a pretty good feeling this is lacking in all curriculums that are related to aging and longevity. We're taught to look for hot flashes, night sweats, mood changes, wonky periods. Pretty much that's it. But we do have so much more, like the genitourinary syndrome of menopause, the musculoskeletal syndrome of menopause. These are all kind of new buzzwords that are coming around. Not so new if you're in that world, but I think this has got to be addressed. So what do we do? Okay, you've got all these crazy symptoms going on. Track your menopause symptoms. I've got a menopause tracker. I'll link it in the show notes. Grab that and start tracking every single day. Whether or not you have a period, it doesn't matter. If you do have a period, you just make sure you log that. And you're going to find some trends out there. And you're going to find out what is estrogen dominance. Maybe you've got too much estrogen relative to progesterone. Maybe you're low in testosterone. And you can track your symptoms and how you're feeling, and you'll figure out a lot of stuff. And then you can present this to your doctor, right? Super, super important, so that you're not only learning about yourself, you're getting your healthcare provider to help care for you based on data. And I would also recommend that you find a menopause literate doctor, one who's qualified, one who's got experience, or at least is properly trained in menopause. So I've got a blog article as well, how to find a menopause doctor. So go check that out too. I'll have to remember to put all these in the show notes. Number 3, brain volume shrinks post-menopause. Crazy. It's crazy. We definitely don't want that to happen, because when we lose our estrogen, the gray matter, which is in memory-related brain regions, it's crazy. So that's something we need to be really aware of. So it declines, estrogen goes away. That reduces the gray matter in these parts of the brain that are related to the memory. Gray matter is found in both the outer part of the brain and as well as some other structures that are deep inside the brain. But the gray matter has most of the brain's neuronal cells, okay, brain neurons, these cells, and they're responsible for processing information like muscle control, seeing, hearing, memory. These are just to name a few. And the brain also has white matter. So maybe you've heard of gray matter and white matter. They're both important, right? So we don't want to lose either one of them. And the white matter is the inner part of the brain that's just underneath the gray matter. And it's made up of these things called myelinated axons, which are these long thread-like parts of the neuron or a brain cell, right? If you've ever seen a brain cell, it looks like a little star, and then there's like these little tails, and it's the myelin that covers these thread-like parts, like the plastic protection on an electric wire. So you can get that analogy going. And then these axons, these long little tails, connect to other parts of the gray matter, and then that allows this communication between the regions of the brain. So when those myelin starts to wear off, imagine like an electric cord, like that protective covering starts to deplete, then there's miscommunication. It's not firing. And I remember this analogy that my professor taught me. It's kind of like Christmas tree lights in terms of Alzheimer's, for example. And you start to lose some of that myelin sheath protection. And when you have one or two lights out, right? Everybody's got a couple of lights out of their Christmas tree lights. And if you celebrate Christmas, right? But you know what I mean? And you don't really notice until there's a long string, and then it goes less and less and less. So that's the communications is why that's when you start seeing the symptoms of menopause, right? So let's get back to the system, right? Like why this all matters. Why does this understanding of gray and white matter matters? Because estrogen, it plays a real protective role in keeping that gray and white matter in the brain healthy and protecting those myelin sheaths so that they don't wear and tear. And there's this great research by Dr. Lisa Mosconi. You maybe heard of her. There's other research as well supporting her that during and after menopause, that gray matter volume, especially in the hippocampus and that prefrontal cortex, which are really important for memory and then executive function, that can shrink. And when that shrinks, we're more at risk for Alzheimer's disease and cognitive decline. So we also know that women are more at risk than men. So this is really important. So we studied in gerontology, we studied Alzheimer's a lot. And we had many courses on it, but we never discussed menopause as a contributing factor. We never talked about the drop of hormones being a big contributing factor to that. So you're now aware. What can we do? What can women do? Prioritize your cognitive health, especially if you've done any gene testing and you have the ApoE4 gene, which I have, which is why I'm so interested in this topic. So I would get some testing, maybe some intervention, maybe consider hormone therapy, exercise, right? We know exercise is good for the brain. Whatever is good for the heart is also good for the brain. We want to have more blood flow, right? We can do this through breath work. That's really important. Nitric oxide. Some people take supplements. Stay mentally active. Do the heavy lifting for your brain. This is really important. I've learned a lot of this from Dr. Dale Bredesen, who's a neurologist and a leader in Alzheimer's research. And he says it's kind of like lifting a heavy weight. Do the work that's like heavy lifting. So learning a language, learning a musical instrument, maybe learning some complex mathematical, what's the word I'm looking for? Problems, right? Maybe my myelin sheaths are starting to wear away. And so we want to stay mentally active. And it's not doing Sudoku. Or crosswords. Like, okay, that's great if you want to have fun. But we need to do something that hurts a little bit. You know, when you're thinking of a word like I was, okay, that's my brain trying to send the signal. What was that word? What was that word? And I remember when I was learning Chinese, every time I would hesitate and try to remember the word, she'd tell me. And I'm like, stop it. Because that's like me trying to lift a heavy weight to build big muscle. And then here somebody comes along and lifts it for me. My muscles will never grow and be strong if someone's always lifting the weight for me. So that's why language is important, or that learning complex mathematical problems, or learning musical instruments, because it's hard. It's kind of hard. Brain kind of hurts for a moment. And that's really important to keep those connections there. So that's why I say stay mentally active. And we always say in gerontology, lifelong learning is protective. Always learn new things, or even taking a different route home, or travel. I always say travel is an amazing way to keep your brain healthy. There's challenges there. It's not always comfortable. You may have to, in the olden days when we didn't have Google Translate, you had to figure things out without look at hand gestures and try to figure things out without Google Translate. So anyways, that's the mentally active, but also emotionally stable. That's also super important. So keeping mental health in that sense stable is really, really important. And when you think about it, Alzheimer's can start about 20 years before the diagnosis. I've heard shorter, I've heard longer, but that's why I always like to say 20. I've heard 18, heard 25. Keep in mind what you're doing today. If you're in your 50s, oh my gosh, do something now to protect your future self, your future brain, and all these little things that I'm just talking about. And there's a reel I literally just posted a few days ago called The 5 Ways to Get Alzheimer's Disease. I know it sounds a little silly. It's definitely sarcastic, but I got it. I was inspired by the interview I did with Dr. Dale Bredesen, and also in his books, where he goes on to describe the day of the average American, more or less, or the average person living in the modern world, and how that contributes to Alzheimer's disease. The 5 ways was eat junk, stop exercising, forget your sleep, stay stressed, and stop flossing. And there's reasons I'll put a link to that if you want the show notes to find that. And those are just 5, because Dr. Dale Bredesen talks about the 36 holes you need to plug in order to figure out what's the root causes of your dementia or Alzheimer's. So a whole lot more, but we only got 60 seconds on Instagram. That's all I could do. So that's one thing you can do. And then read up on Dr. Lisa Mosconi's work. She's got 3 books that I'm aware of: The Menopause Brain, The XX Brain, and Brain Food. All of them are fabulous books. And if you all want to take a deeper dive into brain health and menopause, she's your go-to. So anyways, yeah, follow me on Facebook and Instagram if you want just more tips on how to protect our brain. The next one, number 4. I didn't know that heart disease risk spikes after menopause, or even I see it in the perimenopause experience for sure in my community. So our LDL, our quote unquote bad cholesterol, increases. HDL, our quote unquote good cholesterol, which I hate these words good and bad because they're all necessary for one reason or another, but the HDL drops, and then heart disease risk increases. Also, your triglycerides tank, insulin resistance, and all this stuff is interconnected, but your risk for heart disease literally spikes with the loss of our hormones. And we know that heart disease is the number 1 killer of women and men. So men generally have a higher risk of dying from cardiovascular disease than women, but women can have a higher mortality rate after a heart attack or a stroke. And it's because they make up a larger number of the absolute deaths, right? Because some people go, oh no, women die more of heart disease than men. And it's a little gray there because women live longer. And when you're talking about these older populations, well, yeah, women are getting heart disease more, but because they're living on the planet a little bit longer. It doesn't matter. Heart disease is the number 1 killer. It doesn't matter. No one wins a prize because they die more often, but you want to be aware of that. And again, this was totally missed in my education. Estrogen, that estrogen heart health connection was not acknowledged. I mean, we talked about, when we're talking about heart health, we talked about cortisol. We talked about how that affects the body and the physiology and all of the corticosteroids and all of the other stress hormones, because stress makes a big impact on your heart health. But nothing about the estrogen. So what can we do? Well, get your heart markers tested ASAP. This is the total cholesterol, HDL and LDL, triglycerides, the basic panel. I mean, you can take that, and if all your numbers are in the optimal ranges, well, you can probably stop there if you want, but in the biohacking world, we like to dive deeper. But sometimes when you dive deep, you will find, so there's always this controversy. How far do I actually go? The testing, and it's money, and it's time, and it's stress. And you can get yourself in a real pickle by going too deep. So I think we should probably do a whole other podcast on where biohacking can go wrong. But anyways, know your heart markers, your blood pressure. I've done a ton of episodes with cardiologists and with specialists all about heart health and what we can do and what testing to actually take. But I do have, you know what? I'll make it easy for you. I do have a PDF where I say what are the most important blood tests to get while you are in midlife. So I'll put that in the show notes. And then what else can we do? Obviously, quit smoking, get a healthy body weight, start moving. We need blood flow again. What's good for the brain is good for the heart. And we need that. Nitric oxide. Some people take supplements. We can get nitric oxide with breath work for free if we learn how to breathe. Get that healthy diet on, whatever that is to you. I am diet agnostic. Whatever makes your heart health and your brain health great, do that. Okay, do more of it. And then consider bioidentical hormone therapy. And I would say consider that for your brain as well. Because like I mentioned in this European Menopause Conference, presentation, what happens with the loss of our hormones. And well, for losing, to me, it makes perfect sense. If we're losing our hormones, well, then why don't we? If they're so protective, why don't we put them back? But again, that's a whole conversation. It is a personal decision. I don't think you can out-hormone a bad diet and lifestyle. It's not the only solution, but it can be very supportive, especially if you are in the beginning of this journey. But the one big thing that we did cover a lot, quite extensively in gerontology, was stress and stress management and how that affects your heart. I remember during the mind-body connection, we had a psychologist or the professor for the psychology part and the mental health part, and then we had a professor for the biological part. And so the psychologist would explain what's happening psychologically, and then the other professor was explaining what is happening to the body, what's in reaction to the thoughts in our head. And I do remember that one point we're talking about atherosclerosis. This is the plaque buildup in your arteries, how that's irreversible. And it's like, oh my gosh. Well, my question was, okay, if we have a perfect diet and we're exercising, but we're stressed, how much of an impact does it have on your blood vessels and your heart health? And the professor replied, it has a major impact. Doesn't matter. It's like stress was the big lever. Of course, it helps to eat a healthy diet and exercise and perhaps not smoke. But if you are stressed with all of that, it's no good. So manage your stress. And I've got a link in my freebies where you can show you how I manage stress in a day, kind of a little example. Lots of ideas that you can do because stress management is very personal as well. If I tell you to meditate and that stresses you out, well, then it's no good for you. So go check that out. I also have a list of blood test recommendations for women in midlife that I'll put in the show notes as well. And also supplements. I've got a supplement guide as well. And there's a little section on heart health. But again, these is just icing on top of the cake. Manage the stress first. Number 5, muscle loss isn't just about aging. And so I do remember, well, actually, I'll go into the education part a little bit later. I'm going to first tell you about the facts. We have the musculoskeletal syndrome of menopause, musculoskeletal, muscles and skeletal bones, right? They go hand in hand. But when we're talking about the muscles, women can lose up to 30% of muscle post-menopause. And 10% of that happens during this transition. It's insane. So we have to remember also that muscle and bone are highly interconnected. The more muscle mass you have and the more strength you have, the more impact that has to keep the bones strong as well. And they say if you have weak bones, if they're fragile or osteoporotic, 1 in 2 women over the age of 50 will have a bone fracture in her lifetime. 1 in 2. That's insane. And when we know that falls and fractures in older adults over the age of 65, because a lot of people miss that number, right? If you're over the age of 65 and have a fracture in a fall or a fall in a fracture, you are more likely to die within a year. And I've heard different statistics. I always say about 30%. That's pretty high. Okay. And there's many reasons for that, which we're going into, but it's pretty important to keep your muscles strong, have mass, power, and strength. They're very, very important, all 3 of them. So we don't want to get frail. We don't want to have a fall. Our muscles are metabolic spanks. It helps our metabolism, our insulin, our blood glucose. And without it, we're more at risk of dying earlier. Disability as well. If you fall and you injure yourself and you're working and you can't go to work, you're on disability. And that's a whole other planet to live on. And then, of course, osteoporosis, you're more vulnerable. And in my menopause, I keep saying menopause, my master's of gerontology and my gerontology education, we covered sarcopenia. Absolutely. That was huge. We covered frailty. We covered fall prevention. We covered a lot of these things, but as it relates to a man and a woman, because this happens to men as well, right? But we never identified menopause as one of the drivers of this. So that was really missing in the education. So what can we do? Well, strength train. I'm sure you've heard it over and over and over again, right? Strength training, impact exercises for your bones. Make sure you get enough protein because you can do all the exercise you want, but if you're not feeding those muscles and those bones, they will not grow. And consider bioidentical hormone therapy, right? There's this whole interplay of bone breakdown and bone buildup. And what happens when we lose our estrogen and our testosterone and our progesterone, we have more breakdown than buildup. And that's why our bones become a bit more frail. What else can you do? If you've got injuries, so believe me, I was the person who was like, how am I going to do this? Right? I have osteoarthritis. I have joint pain. I have limited range of motion. I can't do this. Or I'd have an injury. I'm very athletic, so I'd have some kind of injury. So if you're in the camp of injuries, pain, limitations, you can work around it. You work with a trainer. There are some things that you can do within your limitations. And I've been able to bounce back year after year after year with the training that I had with my physiotherapists. And then I had a whole lot of these other biohacks at working until they didn't work anymore. And then I had to have the surgery. But if you don't not that serious, not that aggressive, you can still actually bounce back and improve your whole musculoskeletal system with the proper work. And the other thing that, if you've been following me more than a minute, I'm a huge fan of blood flow restriction, partial occlusion, oppression training. These are all different words that are basically saying you can improve muscle mass with the release of your own growth hormone through this sort of partial restriction of your blood flow in your arms or your legs. And we have all the podcasts on that. You can listen to it. But that has been a lifesaver for me for muscle mass. And since I've been talking about it for about 2 years now, others have also been using this. Oh, it's been more than 2 years I've been talking about it. And I've been getting phenomenal feedback for all different kinds of devices and ways to do this. So look into this, especially if you are injured, have a surgery, or in pain, limited mobility. It's a game changer. I cannot understand why we're not studying blood flow restriction in gerontology. And I get that there is a risk for people who have heart issues, which a big portion of the population, if you're over the age of 65, do. But there's a lot of benefits if you are doing it correctly or with the right tools, because there are ways around it as well. And if you are using blood flow restriction, it improves vascularity of your arteries, of your blood vessels. It improves that flexibility. There's so many benefits. It's unbelievable. I just hope that more and more people start talking about it. And I would love for this to be part of the curriculum of gerontology, but we'll see. The other thing to do that can help is work on your mobility, agility, and flexibility. We're all talking about strength and strength training and building muscle, but we need to be mobile and agile. If we're about to trip and fall, we need to be able to stop ourselves from falling. There's fall prevention exercises. If you're older listening to this and you do have some limitations, or you got older parents who will never go to the gym, well, at least teach them how to prevent a fall, or how to catch themselves if they do fall, or how to fall properly. It's so important. I know it sounds weird, but there are videos out there teaching this. So please go and do that. So it's, again, really important, again, your flexibility as well. So these are key components that I just I came up with myself. I wasn't taught this in gerontology, and no one seems to be talking about mobility, agility, flexibility as we age, or at least they're not being very clear on it. I just see it as see older adults moving through the world. And I think it's an important thing we do now. How mobile are you? Can you do a squat? Can you get up off the floor without using your hands? Again, if you were to trip, are you falling actually? Because maybe you're in your 50s now and you fall and nothing happens, but fall when you're 68, different story if your bones are not strong. And then again, the flexibility. Can you still put your bra on? Can you still reach down and get things off the floor without breaking your back? And again, all these things, there's so many ways to work on this when it's like a whole other podcast episode. But anyways, let's move on. Number 6, the genitourinary syndrome of menopause. This affects over 50% of postmenopausal women. What is that? It's also called GSM. Again, this is another word that's kind of new, maybe circulating through the menopause universe. It's a chronic condition. Okay, doesn't go back. When you're thinking about the musculoskeletal syndrome of menopause, and you're thinking about bone loss, osteoporosis, sarcopenia, we can reverse all that. That's cool. But GSM, it's chronic. There are certain things you can work on. You can improve it for sure. But it's not like hot flashes where it goes away and everything's stable, everything's fine. No, it's chronic. You got to do something about it. And you can do something about it. And it's caused by the loss of estrogen in the vaginal and the urinary tissues. Okay. Think your vagina, your bladder. And so you may feel vaginal dryness, burning, itching, pain during sex, that urgency to pee, like I got to go now. Maybe overactive bladder. So you're waking up at night a lot to pee. And it's like, God, I didn't drink that much. Why am I peeing so often at night? And then recurrent UTIs. These are just some of them. And it matters. I mean, if it's affecting 50% of women, yes, it matters because it's affecting your quality of life. It affects your intimacy, your sexual function, your bladder control. your daily comfort, honestly, always having to look for a bathroom if you just go for a walk. I'm sorry, that's just very limiting. You're going to wind up at home and be lonely. And so many times you may go to the doctor and they go, oh, it's normal. It's just part of aging. No, I don't want to be in adult diapers. Yes, it's common, but it's not normal, at least in my book. So I wouldn't accept that. And in the European Menopause Society Congress that I went to, we had, again, so much information. It was really great to have all this information about the GSM and teaching these doctors how to identify it, what to do about it. It's not as known, but it's really, really matters. And remember this one presentation where they showed a part of the GSM called vaginal introital stenosis. And the introital means the vaginal opening. Okay, introital, so think about inside. And this is just a medical term. It's describing that when the vaginal opening is narrowing, getting really small, or becomes less elastic because of the loss of estrogen. And we had these scary images of vaginal openings, and there was some of them that were size like, I would say a quarter, maybe even less, a nickel, if you even know what that is, because it's this American currency. Very small, very small. So you can imagine if you have an opening that small, you're uncomfortable. If you have sex, you are literally tearing. I've heard some women describe as penetration is like a knife going through them. And even if you're just getting a routine pelvic exam from a doctor, boy, that hurts. And yet this isn't something that most women are warned about or screened for. But to be fair, this is what I learned from the presentation, that it happens most frequently, and it's most documented in the research among women who have had pelvic cancer treatments, radiotherapy, chemo, radiation for, say, cervical, endometrial, and other kind of gynecological cancers. So it doesn't mean that there's plenty of other women who are suffering in many other ways, but I'm just talking about that vaginal introital stenosis because that was pretty scary. I've never seen images like that. And so you can imagine if you are going on a date, if you're like recently dating or divorced and you want to have new sexual relationships, you're scared. It's not going to happen. And I've met women who've talked about this. There are solutions that we can do, which we'll go into later. In our gerontology studies, I do remember we talked about older adults and sex. Like we had evidence presented to us that the older adults who were surveyed, at least in the US, in large US studies, most older adults, and this is, we're talking about people over the age of 65, usually it's 65 to 80, they would all say sex is important to their quality of life. Okay, so we can't have this stereotype, oh, older adults don't have sex. BS, right? We also were taught how to speak to doctors, especially geriatric physicians maybe, or regular doctors, that you need to screen older adults for STDs, sexually transmitted diseases. You can't just assume that they're not having sex. They're actually having a lot of sex, so a lot more than you think. So you do need to screen for that. And then on top of that, and you're thinking about, oh, I don't need sex or I don't need relationships. If you look at the Harvard Study of Adult Development, which is the longest longitudinal study on older adults, it has proven since 1938, and it's still ongoing, that one of the biggest contributors to living a happier, longer life is strong relationships, those strong bonds. It doesn't mean you have to be a sexual relationship or your partner. It just means you need those relationships. And part of that is perhaps sexual relationships. So don't ignore that. Don't go, oh, I'm not going to deal with my vagina. It's really, really important. And I do also remember in gerontology, we didn't cover GSM. I don't even know if it was even a word back then, but we did cover bladder control. But it was applicable for men and women, right? Because this happens to men as well, and you have these prostate issues. But really, despite the fact that over half of postmenopausal women suffer from these symptoms, we didn't talk a whole lot about vaginal health in older women. And definitely no mention was talk about local estrogen therapy or any of its benefits. So missing in education. Hopefully we can change that. And then what can we do, right? Okay, you're probably listening going, oh my God, don't be scared. This doesn't happen to everybody. I just want you to be aware of it. know that GSM is not something you have to tolerate if you have any of these symptoms, the painful sex, the burning, the UTIs, frequent urination, all that stuff. Talk to your doctor about local vaginal estrogen or DHEA therapy. You can put these are all usually vaginal therapies. This is super great for reversing vaginal atrophy. It's very well documented. If a doctor has any kind of menopause training, they should probably know about this. And then I would also encourage you go to a pelvic floor specialist. I've done a great episode with Kim Vopni. She's also known as the vagina coach. Her whole life is dedicated to pelvic floor health. She's the one that prompted me to go and find one, and actually did in Spain, oddly enough. But it is really, really important because they teach you so many things. Yes, it's uncomfortable. There's usually, hopefully, a woman putting their finger up your vagina and kind of feeling around, telling you if you're equal, everything's fine, or atrophied, or how strong you are in there. But it's so worth it. This is for prevention, okay? And for maybe diagnosis of certain things as well. But if you're talking about prevention, if you're like, oh, I don't want that to be me, well, let's put some of these things together, these therapies, the estrogen, the DHEA, or other. Regular sex, that helps, right? That brings blood flow. And if you're single, or masturbation, or we can call it self-exploration, that is great to get to know your body as well. What does it react to? Especially if you're alone, you're in control. I highly recommend that. I've got some podcast episodes coming up, recording. We haven't even recorded yet, with some more sex specialists in both the physical and the mental and the spiritual and sort of the whole biopsychosocial model of sex. So that's more coming to you. Joylux is one of those little devices that got these cool things that help you bring more blood flow to the vaginal area. Also, there's another cream called Inanna cream. If I can remember to put all this stuff in the show notes, I will. But this is, again, something that's super cool to bring more blood flow, especially if you're alone and you don't have regular sex. And I know that it's very common to not want it during this period of time because you're sleeping, you feel like shit, and your vagina hurts, it's painful, all this stuff. So we can do sort some of these things out. Again, think about some supplements. There's some breath work. All this stuff can bring in more nitric oxide. Other thing that we can do is please talk to other women about this. I know it's embarrassing or may feel embarrassing. Let's try to normalize the conversation. And I'm sure some of you have been listening and have been like, yeah, I've done that. And you'll know that when you start a conversation like this with a woman, very often, not always, it resonates with her. She's like, oh my God, me too. And no one wants to talk about it. So you kind of break the ice, you break that stereotype. And it's really important. And when we talk about it, we can then advocate for better health care from our doctors. We can feel more confident about that. When we talk about some of this research that I'm talking about, well, we can ask for more inclusion of women's vaginal health post-reproductive years in research and education. Boy, I'm talking a lot. I hope you have this on double time. So number 7, HRT lowers all-cause mortality. Have you heard that before? Honestly, can floor you. And there's a meta-analysis. A meta-analysis is a study. It's a study that looks at all the studies, not all of them, but lots of studies. And they always look at the large randomized control studies, and they put them all together because we know some studies can be biased, some studies can have problems, and they just kind of look at all of them. And there were 30 of them in this one, and it's by Salpeter et al. In 2004, and they found that HRT reduced mortality by 39% in younger postmenopausal women. And I think the age, I can't remember what the age, if I wrote it down somewhere, I think the average age was about 52, because we're talking about postmenopausal women, younger postmenopausal. So the average age of menopause in the Western world is about 51. Some say 52, some say 50, but around 50. So if you just pass through it, then you're going to be, the younger postmenopausal woman will be in her 50s. Okay. And these trials are using mostly synthetic hormones. They're looking at the conjugated equine estrogens. They're looking at synthetic progestin. They're not looking at bioidentical hormone therapy or the effects of natural progesterone. And I'm careful with that word natural. Doesn't mean like, oh, they found a yam and squeezed it and that's how they get progesterone. No, it also has to go to a lab, get synthesized, but it's bioidentical in structure when you look at it under a microscope to the structure of our own progesterone our body makes. This meta-analysis looked at these studies where most of them were synthetic, were not the same structure. Okay. We know that the safety profile of bioidentical hormone is better. So unfortunately, those are lacking in this meta-analysis. But boy, even so, with the synthetic stuff, we're getting really good results, right? It matters because hormone therapy can improve the quality of life and the health span for so many women, especially if you are symptomatic. And it may increase the lifespan in the younger postmenopausal women. Okay, this is why very often the recommendation is start early as possible, or early as possible, when you need it. Because if you're full of estrogen and progesterone because you're not even perimenopausal, then you don't need it, right? But this benefit is not universal, and it really depends on the timing, the age, and then individual risk factors. This is a conversation you have to have with your own doctor. This is why older women or those with certain risk factors, because by the time she's over 60 or hasn't seen hormones in 10 years, there's been some buildup in her arteries. There's been calcium buildup. There's been some damage that's already been done. So she's not reaping the benefits. It doesn't mean she can never go on hormones. Of course, absolutely. Find the right menopause doctor, looks at all of these things. It's still very, very helpful. It's just that you don't get as many benefits as a younger woman. But don't lose hope. And of course, if you cannot, I hate when I hear sometimes it sounds like the magic bullet. And again, I always say, we can't out hormone a bad diet and lifestyle. We need all these things. And I want to talk to the woman who's decided not to get hormone therapy. You're not going to die. It sounds so scary. I mean, we are going to die, to be honest. We're all going to die. But there's a lot of other things that we can do to protect our bone, our brain, our heart, our breasts, our vagina. There's tons of stuff. Okay. So don't lose hope. If you're like, I'm not taking it, or I can't take it, or whatever reason, it's a personal choice. Nobody should be bullying you into doing anything. In my menopause, I always say that, in my gerontology education, of course, no one talked about HRT, nor this analysis, nor these statistics. If it was talked about, probably, I'm sure, yeah, we did talk about it in our 30-minute conversation. It was just a solution for people who've had menopause symptoms, but nothing really in detail. And that's it. So what can we do, right? We look at the research, we try to look at the current data, speak to a hormone literate provider, to a doctor who's trained in menopause, or it doesn't have to be a doctor, just nurse practitioners. There's women influencers who are amazing at working with women in menopause, but don't let these outdated fears hold you back. Go to my menopause resources page, learn as much as you can about it. There's so much stuff out there. You can even do your own research now on ChatGPT or AI. Not that it's always accurate, but it'll give you a clue. Okay. It's all out there. Now, the last one, number 8, we're finally here. Estrogen loss heightens the stress response. Yeah. It modulates cortisol and the HPA axis, meaning estrogen. Okay. Without it, our stress response intensifies. This is why I always say, a lot of women come to me and they say, gosh, I'm feeling really stressed. I have this, I can't sleep. I'm so stressed. I have anxiety. Is this menopause? And so I ask, what's going on in your life? Oh gosh, well, I just lost my job, or my husband just left me, or well, duh, with or without hormones, we're going to feel stressed. So I always feel like it's usually a combination of both, because then they would say, well, I used to be able to handle these stressors better. And that's where this comes in, right? Because estrogen receptors are all throughout the nervous system. And that is key. So when we lose our estrogen, and as well our progesterone and testosterone, these all play roles, not just one finger pointing at estrogen, then we are less resilient. And I always feel like when I talk to women post-menopause, where everything's sort of evened out, they're so excited. They're so happy for us. She's like, oh my God, you don't even know what it's like on the other side. It's amazing because they've been through it all. And so I feel like, wow, perhaps menopause is a little bit, or at least this transition, because menopause, we're always in menopause, post-menopause. This transition phase is kind of like when you wake up in the middle of the night and you feel a pain or something's on your mind, and it's so exaggerated. You're just like, oh my God, the monsters exist. And then you wake up and there's light and sun, And you're like, oh, it's not that bad. A little bit like that. We don't have to wait. We don't have to suffer. There's so many solutions. So I also want to bring progesterone a little bit into this conversation, because when we think about the stress and stress response and anxiety and poor sleep and all this, progesterone has a lot to do with it, because progesterone starts for many women to decline in our mid-30s. And when I was 35, I was not thinking about menopause. I was like the last thing in my mind, so far away from it, couldn't imagine. I was like, oh, when I'm after 50, I'll probably look into this. And that is an important point to make. So progesterone does play a role. But also when we're thinking about the stress response, because it's not stress that's bad, right? It's the stress response, because we have stress. It's not going away. This is life. Welcome to the world. But it's how we react to the stress. How do we perceive that stress and how we respond to it that really matters. Is our cortisol going to go and spray out everywhere and all these other stress hormones, right? And that causes damage. Remember, the damage in the arteries, damage in creating inflammation. Inflammation created by your brain. There was been no injury, right? But you're getting injured in your blood vessels. It's just insane to think about it like that. But anyways, estrogen is an anti-inflammatory. So this is where this plays in. But anyways, we studied stress in gerontology. We studied the physiology of that. We talked a lot about cortisol, HPA axis, but never did we talk about estrogen's relationship to stress, or progesterone for that matter. So what can we do? Well, recognize hormone-related stress. I met many women who go, oh, I have a hot flash triggered every time I'm in a stressful state, or I'm with this toxic person, or having a challenge. So recognize that. Support your nervous system. Get good sleep hygiene. I know if you're dealing with hot flashes and night sweats, deal with those. Those are associated with more cardiovascular risk. Okay, so don't go, I'm going to just deal with this. I mean, unless you don't care about your cardiovascular health, it's up to you. Who am I to say? Your life. Get appropriate nutrition and exercise and recovery, right? We need more of that. Consider hormone therapy. Again, talk to a trained menopause doctor, especially if you're symptomatic. And then I would say also work on your inner self, who you are. What do you want? Put things into perspective. Learn to prioritize things and create boundaries. Plenty of podcasts on that you can find. But anyways, just in closing, honestly, we cannot talk about healthy aging. We can't talk about longevity. We can't talk about gerontology without talking about menopause and our hormones. So aging education really needs to evolve, and it's got to do better. I should probably write a letter to USC. But maybe with the menopause movement now, hopefully the curriculums are changing. Who knows? But to recap, 1, estrogen impacts every organ system. There are 103 documented symptoms. Menopause can shrink brain volume. Heart disease risk increases sharply after menopause. Muscle loss isn't just aging. GSM, that genitourinary syndrome of menopause, affects 50% or more of postmenopausal women. HRT, hormone replacement therapy, lowers all-cause mortality, and estrogen loss heightens the stress response. So menopause, honestly, it's not a niche topic. It's a core event in every single woman's aging journey that influences nearly every disease that we're trying to prevent. So let's start normalizing the menopause conversation in medicine, in the curriculum. Let's make it a required chapter in any curriculum that is teaching aging, and not just like an afterthought. And if you're a woman going through this transition, I promise you, you're not crazy. You're not broken. You're definitely not alone. Get informed, advocate fiercely, and join communities like ours to biohack menopause together. So I'll have links in the show notes that you can join our free Facebook group, Biohacking Menopause. And I also have a private membership where we can get a little bit closer, and we have live Q&As every week with me and my guests on the episodes. Every single episode has every guest is invited for a private live Q&A session just for you. We're still small. We're still very intimate. Everybody's questions get answered, and people pay hundreds of dollars to meet these doctors, practitioners, researchers in person, and you have them all to yourself. So many other things are going on in the Biohacking Menopause membership group. And if you are in healthcare, in public health, or just aging advocacy, take this episode as a little nudge to start asking, where is menopause in our aging curriculum? And share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. So if you made it to the end, I know this is super long. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. I do hope to connect with you. Reach out to me on any social media platform or LinkedIn or an email. I'm happy to hear from you and I'm happy to help. So take care. Have a good day, good night, good morning, wherever you're at.